Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you for waiting patiently. There was some technical difficulties with the Wi-Fi, I think, because everybody's staying at home and using up Wi-Fi. My Wi-Fi has been very, very slow lately, more than usual. So the live stream was having a hard time starting up. Hopefully the connection is going to remain stable for the next hour. But we'll see. So this month is again open to the public. So a lot of people might be joining from outside of Patreon. The questions were submitted by my Patreon members. And those are the questions I'll be answering today. Also on my Patreon, this month in April, I started some little tasks for submissives, and they had the gold and captive members are working on their second task right now, middle of it, and this Saturday we will be discussing how it went, so that will be exciting. I will be continuing with the tasks for a little while, and we'll see how that goes. It's been very exciting to try something new. So let's see, this month's Patreon theme was kinks and fetishes that you don't understand explained. So I will, attempt to go into a lot more details of the psychology behind a lot of the kinks and fetishes that you may not understand. Just because you're kinky in a certain way doesn't mean that you understand everything. And this is reflected, I feel like, a lot even in the kink community. As I was exploring kink early on and discovering different niche kink communities, I found that they can be the most open-minded people about specific kinks and differences and alternative lifestyle choices people make, but then completely judgmental about other kinks that maybe their group and their community is not really participating in. So, maybe somebody's really into spanking and they're part of the spanking group, like a local spanking community, but then maybe go off about how they don't understand foot fetish and that's something completely, they have no idea why people will be into it, and they can't wrap their heads around it. So just because somebody is kinky doesn't mean they are really understand the full spectrum of all sexual deviance and kinks there are out there. So I wanted to give my Patreon members some opportunity to ask about some of the things that they themselves do not get. Obviously, if they're subscribed to my Patreon, they are in some way kink curious or kink engaged people. But these are questions from them. And we shall see what kind of questions we have. So some of the questions I have is regarding pain, physical pain. There is, this one's a fun one. People who don't understand vanilla sex. Somebody was curious about omorashi or pants wetting fetish. And kind of similar note, golden showers. What else? Splashing or wham, wet and messy fetish. Okay, and what else? There is About rape fetish, rape fantasy rather. So that's a big one. So those are some of the topics I will be going over today. So I hope you stick around and enjoy. Just diving into the deep psychology of human sexuality. Okay, so the first question. I don't understand attraction for heavy pain, such as caning or whipping, and would like to know why some people do. Okay. So one of the big things, the first things I would say is with all of these kinks and fetishes, there can be multiple different angles to it. So people might be into the same fetish and completely coming from different like entry points into why they enjoy that particular thing. So I'm going to attempt to go through as many of these entry points or angles as I can think of. And there might be more. And some people might enjoy that particular fetish might resonate with all the different angles, and they might only resonate with one and completely don't understand the other ones or don't identify with the other entry points. But here it is. So for yes, heavy pain, masochism, it is brain chemistry. So there's a lot of studies that have been done about how pain affects our brain, and one of them is endorphins. So when you are subjected to physical pain, there are a lot of things that happens to your body. One is that you start getting building up endorphins, and when you build up endorphins, there is a point where it's kind of like a little bit of a high that you experience, and it's similar to something like the runner's high. A lot of long distance runners also experience these endorphin rush, or so those kind of juicy chemicals that you're trying to trigger with controlled and intentional pain. So you're almost like hacking your brain through your body is what you're doing when you're engaging in pain play. So it's kind of just like all these bursts of release of chemicals. Once you kind of reach that point, it's not going to happen with just one smack. It's going to be this continuous buildup, and then there's this release. So perhaps if you have experienced a few really heavy strokes, you might not get there, and then you might think, who would ever want this? But if you play with somebody who's experienced and know how to get you there, if you have for instance, low pain tolerance, then you want to experience this high. You want to play with somebody who knows how to build up the pain, so to speak. They're not going to go heavy-handed immediately, but really gradually, ramping up the pain so you are able to achieve that threshold. Yes, so. Second one is the helplessness and the release of control. So this is kind of more of these basic, fundamental side of BDSM and power exchange. When something is being done to your body that you have no control over, it can put you in this really helpless state, and that is a good way to experience it as pain. If somebody is doing something to your body that you can't make stop, you can't let, and that sense of helplessness and lack of control can be exciting as somebody who is submissive. So there's like, you want to separate masochism from submission, because those are not mutually exclusive. So somebody can be very masochistic and not be submissive. So they can be really into the sensation of pain and the endorphin release and these kind of things, but they just want somebody to administer it to them, not because they want to overpower them, but it's just a sensation that they want to explore. So that's just masochism without the submission. You might not be into pain at all, but the idea of taking pain can be exciting to you because you enjoy doing things that against your will, or something that the Dom really wants to do to you, and you want to take it whether or not it's particularly something you enjoy or not, but you enjoy the act of doing whatever your mistress or master tells you to. So that's the submissive side of it. So it can be separate. You could enjoy both of it. You could be a masochist and a submissive, but it could be separate. Another one is flow state. So this is a state you can reach when you're focused completely on one thing. You're in the zone, so to speak. So you're in the zone. You can shut the whole world out, and you're completely focused on this thing in the moment at hand. And heavy pain will definitely put you in there, right? So if you're focused completely and meditating on your breathing, so you can take the pain, like the next slash, when you're focused on your body to relax it so the next slash won't be as painful, you're focusing on maybe bringing kind of Zen, into your mind, like kind of meditating so you can kind of transcend the pain. That is a flow state. And there's a lot of mindfulness and health kind of benefits to being in a flow state, and being in a heavy pain session over time, like an extended period of time, can definitely put you there. So there's that. And let's see. Trophy marks and bruises. So you might be somebody who enjoys being marked, and maybe you don't enjoy the pain itself, but being marked by your Dom to have this achievement, like this accomplishment, and there is evidence of it. You get to earn these bruises and marks. That might be something that people might be into, even though maybe they're not really into the pain itself. They are so elated and so feel connected to their Dom once they have this mark that they get to kind of secretly, or not so secretly, carry around on their body to remember that moment by that intense bonding. So those are things that potentially somebody could be into as well. So that will be about pain. Let's go to the next question. The one fantasy I truly don't understand is monogamous, heterosexual, plain vanilla sex. You know, the kind where the man penetrates the woman in missionary for 5 minutes until the friction of his penis inside her vagina causes him to climax, and then they both turn over and go back to sleep. Like, seriously, I don't get it. Maybe one time, sure, but night after night, how do they not die from boredom? Can you explain vanilla sex to me? I'm lost. That's a fun question. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, and a lot of assumptions and a lot of things. This is me like going in like through this pathway of empathy and understanding people who might be engaging in this activity, because I am a person who also don't care for vanilla sex and find it quite boring and unengaging. But what's great about what my career has allowed me to do is that I'm always constantly exposed to all of this different kinds of sexuality and kinks and things that I've never been into, or it doesn't immediately turn me on, but I have this opportunity to really understand where they're getting their pleasure from, what's triggering in their minds, why are they attracted to this thing, and really think about it and jump in there and try to connect with them in that way. So this has allowed me to be able to think in this way. So some of the things that I would say about this: 5-minute quickie vanilla heterosex. Dopamine hit. Yes. So orgasms are little dopamine buttons. So, when you press that button, it gets you a little kick of dopamine, and it's pleasurable and feels so good. So it's a very quick and simple way to hit that button. So it's similar to masturbation. Why do we keep masturbating? It's like you might have this urge, and if you do this action, you're gonna get that pleasure feeling. So that's like the way to engage in that very quickly. So yeah, it's kind of like scratching an itch. Yeah, you have the urge and you try to itch it. It's not a conscious decision. This is the way I'm going to have sex and engage with my partner. It's not this conscious decision, but kind of like letting your urge lead you and scratching that itch. And not everybody has the time and energy or will to engage in engaged sex all the time. It takes a lot of brain power and emotional energy to be very present and very meant for mental and emotional connection with a partner. Kink takes a lot of energy, mental energy, to be there with somebody and go through this extended experience. And if you're, let's say, married couple with kids, and you have that itch, maybe you're so tired from your day that you don't have the mental energy and time to activate all of these fantasies and foreplay and kinks and the psychological turn-ons, and you just want that itch to kind of subside, right? So I would say that's what's happening. Let's say, okay, so there's also another thing I think is that people are in a different spectrum of how strong their craving for this kind of vanilla sex, penis and vagina sex is, right? So some people might be wired to be super turned on by that. Just the mental imagery, the act itself might be super triggering already, sexually arousing, as opposed to somebody might not be at all aroused or somewhere in between that's like, it's a little arousing, but you know, when you're a little tired or not in the mood, it's not enough to get you off, so to speak. So if you're in this far side of like just seeing a pussy, seeing tits, seeing a cock is just like drives you crazy, you know, and drives you wild, then there's not much work, so to speak, of mental activation you have to do to be aroused and get going and have sex, right? And these people might just stick to that. There's no like failed opportunities, like let's say if you're on the other side of the spectrum where you're not as aroused by it, maybe a little bit, maybe sometimes, but not as aroused by this vanilla types of sex, then you still have that horniness, you still have that urge, and then now you have to start searching around, you have to start experimenting and finding that trigger that really, like, you know, sets your alarms, all of your good alarms off, and gets you really aroused. So then you might be somebody who starts sexually experimenting with different things and find all these different kinks that you're triggered by. But if you're somebody who's just every time that visual, that sensation gets you off, then maybe they never even thought to explore something else, you know? And by the way, they might find that they are aroused by so many other things and kinks and fetishes, perhaps, if they did try and explored. So one of the things I might encounter is couples who one person is on this side of the spectrum where they are not as aroused by vanilla sex itself, and one is completely fine with it, and it gets them off every time. So then this person maybe on this side of the spectrum might, you know, be like prompted to try to explore. Like I might try to, you know, like dig into their fantasies and try to pick out, even in the most vanilla fantasy, let's say, yeah, I like it when I get pinned against the wall when my partner makes out with me before we start having sex. So that even with that level of vanilla-ness, you know, I could kind of pick apart, like, ooh, they might be into the physical sensation of being handled, their bodies being handled. Maybe they do enjoy a little bit of being tossed around a bit, being taken control of. So that's that in and of itself, just by that one little thing that seems quite vanilla. And that gives me like a little direction to push them into, to suggest to explore. And then they might discover that they do indeed enjoy being pinned down and being, you know, maybe the next step is trying bondage, things like that. So, you know, it might be just that they went through their whole life not needing to explore their sexuality. Yeah. Okay, so the next one. Can you explain omorashi and wedding? Wetting, like wetting your pants, not wedding, like getting married. So, yes, this is like one, you know, toilet training is something, one of the earliest things that you have to master as a child, right? So until then, your id dictates everything. You are not consciously learning or withholding your behavior, learning how to behave like quote unquote civilized adult is a process. And we have to go through it step by step as a child, right? And so one of the earliest things you have to learn how to do is bladder control, like toilet training. So when you're 3, 4 years old, even, it might take up to 10 years old, perhaps, you are like told to pee in the potty, and sometimes you don't make it, and sometimes you have accidents, pee in your pants, and there's a lot of embarrassment and kind of like failure and things like this that we are over and over exposed to in this early childhood stage. So like the embarrassment associated with losing control of your body or not having enough control of it. So that leaves quite the impression in early childhood, I think. This sense of lack of control and your bladder, right? And so that's something that could like continue on when you become adult and adult, and when you discover that you are into this power play, control and lack of control, losing control, that type of thing. This might be one thing that you might be already kind of imprinted on to enjoy, to find excitement. It's also, yes, let's see. Yeah, so like maybe you have memories of being made fun of for peeing your pants in school or things like this that could really put an impression on you. And yeah, so accessing vulnerability, so that's something that when you're exploring kink and power play later on, it could be a very big trigger to access this vulnerable feeling you felt in childhood. So that's one aspect of it. And from the dom side, it's enjoying somebody being desperate, that expression of desperation when somebody is like, about to have an accident, about to pee themselves. There might be this, yes, because it's the signal, this expression is a signal of somebody losing control of their body. There's another element, which is regression, right? Because as an adult, we are expected to have mastered this. And so, we rarely have accidents, and we're supposed to have mastery over our bodies in that way. And to like explore wetting your pants, that sensation, that physicality of it, really brings you back to this regressive state where you are free, you're exploring freedom from this adult life, social learning that we've all gone through, right? So a lot of kink, this is going to come back with other fetishes later on, but a lot of it is about accessing that regressive state where you don't have to talk and behave in ways that is acceptable to an adult, where we're socialized to behave. We're letting kind of our inner tendencies and our just kind of come through, and in a safe space where that's accepted and not being judged by, right? Because a lot of adult socializing comes with like memories of being scolded, being told no, things like this, that is kind of like repressing all of our kind of urges, right? To not show it to the public, to control our urges. And we're making a safe space for that to flow and explore it. Yes. Okay, next is quite related, some of the topics. So next one, can you discuss some of the psychological triggers behind golden showers? So that's also very similar to Omurashi. It is, I think, prevalent in a lot of people, this desire, because of such very common experiences of focus on your bladder and pee when you were younger. So going through toilet training, that type of things, as I explained before. So that might come back as kind of this trigger and fixation of some familiarity of this childhood state of mind and sensations. It can be about degradation. There's a lot of cultures where, peeing on somebody, pissing on somebody is an act of dominance and degradation, right? So if you get in a fist fight and so you beat the shit out of somebody, and then pissing on them is this act of really showing that they're less than human and how powerful you are to do this act. So there's some cultural ingrainedness of being pissing on somebody as this act of dominance, and being pissed at is this act of this experience of degradation. So if somebody is into being degraded, being turned on by humiliation, then being pissed on might be this big symbolic act of that might trigger that fantasy. Let's say, okay, so another thing I would say, some people can be into golden showers and not be into degradation at all. They might just be into, it's like pee is something that comes out of genitals. And if you have this fixation and this huge turn on and arousal by looking at the genitals, by interacting with it, peeing is another thing that genitals do, right? It comes out of it. And something like that is, it might be triggering. You have this kind of Pavlovian association. Pussy is arousing, and pussy and pee is always combined, or cock and pee, right? Is like, that's paired every time. Then you might start having a arousing feeling from pee itself as well. So there's that might be a developed association with that. And you might also enjoy the sensation of it. Pee has its own temperature, and it's in terms of sensory play, just experiencing different sensation on your body. It's another sensation to play with. The stream has a particular sensation against your skin, the temperature of it, and all of that. So that can be enjoyable if you're somebody who does not see pee as something taboo. Just enjoying the sensation of it might be. If you do see something as taboo, so taboo and sexual arousal goes hand in hand a lot of times. So that's been also quite well researched as well, that if you really don't understand some crazy fetish or kink, the good question to ask is it socially taboo? And if the answer is yes, then that probably explains why a lot of people have that fetish. Yeah, so for instance, let's say there's a particular fetish that's prevalent in a certain culture, but it's not in the other. Usually it's because that first culture see that as a more socially taboo thing, and the other doesn't see it as a socially taboo thing at all. So it becomes like this exciting taboo, like engaging in taboo being very exciting. And like, you know, when you're doing something taboo, your heart rate goes up and all of these sensations that adds to your sexual arousal. Yeah, so that could be a thing. Yeah, so usually using the toilet, peeing is a very private thing, and so it's like, you know, we have toilet stalls where we're not supposed to see somebody peeing. We don't want to be seen, and so that is, you know, you can see how peeing can be seen as a taboo in many cultures. If you grew up peeing as like a taboo thing, to witness it, to be present in the act of it could be a taboo to you, and then therefore exciting. It can also, from a femdom or BDSM perspective, a lot of times it's described, let's say drinking the piss, right, is described as something that is, you feel like you're consuming part of this somebody that you put on a pedestal, right? The goddess, the, you know, the person that you want to see high above you, and you get to consume something that went through their body, and it's going to be part of your body, you know. So that act can be arousing in this power play sense as well. Okay, so two more questions. Number 5, let's see, I'm going to take a sip of water. I know you may not have the water once it comes out of me. You can just watch me drink. Keep drinking the water and fantasize. Number 5. One fetish that makes me feel a little icky is splashing, or really the entire genre of wet and messy fetishism, or wham. When I was a kid, I remember watching Nickelodeon's game shows such as You Can't Do That on television, or Double Dare, which featured contestants getting green slime poured on their heads for being forced to do wet and messy physical challenges. And I remember feeling so grossed out, yet I couldn't stop watching. Can you explain the appeal of splashing? Is it more about being aroused by the specific physical sensation, or general feeling of humiliation from engaging in acts that normal society deems degrading? So it can be both, either or. So yeah, so messy food. Yeah, messiness of food, again, is considered uncivilized. It's not good manners, right? We're taught to eat not messily, very clean and sophisticated. We have utensils, and that's seen as high culture. It's proper, you know, etiquette. So we're socialized to be to do these things, and therefore the other side of it is kind of this regressive thing that you get to experience. So a lot of this fetish can be, explained by a lot of things I went over already today. So yeah, so like this probably happens a little later after toilet training, but being trained to not eat messy and being scolded when you do, and this process of training of being an adult. And so you have this experience of learning how to control yourself. And so it could be linked to early childhood, being shamed, embarrassed, body sensations also, So on the contrary, it could be about bodily sensation, the simple feeling of the squishy and mushy things all over your body. Like I know somebody who specifically into beans. They like to do splashing with beans, like a little kiddie pool full of beans. And so once you get into exploring this fetish of splashing, maybe you'll try different things, and then you really will learn what sensation feels best, So this feeling of it all over your feet and through your toes, around your genitals, all of these feelings, that is something that is new and something you don't get to encounter very often. So yeah, people might be into those sensations. Yes, and then there's you mentioned that you were grossed out by it, but couldn't stop watching. And this phenomena of being disgusted by, but unable to stop looking at something is called pathos. So it has a name to it. And it's very, people might experience this in different ways, like, popping really gnarly zits and extracting blackheads, things that are like gross, but you really can't stop watching it or doing it. So that's like maybe this disgust and arousal pairing can be a thing. And there's also evidence that when you are aroused, your tolerance for disgust goes way down. So you might engage in things that are repulsive, but then you really somehow excited by it. And maybe after you're not aroused, you think about it like, how in the world I did that. So yeah, so there might be elements of that as well. Okay, last question. There's a lot of good questions today. One desire I don't fully understand is rape fantasies. I know you've touched on this before, but I think it deserves further exploration. One recent study found that nearly 2/3 of women have had at least occasional fantasies about being forced into sex, and many men have this fantasy too. But of course, no one actually wants to be sexually assaulted. So why then are these fantasies so prevalent? In your last live stream, you mentioned the empowerment of intentionality. Is that what rape fantasy is about? Taking ownership of the fantasy as an act of sexual empowerment? Or is that explanation too intellectualized? And how does one go about actualizing this fantasy? In other words, how do you consensually recreate an inherently non-consensual act. So a lot to unpack here as well. Yeah, so for some people, it can end up being act of, it could end up being empowering after the fact, but that's probably not the reason why most people fantasize about it. It's just kind of, if it's done well, if it's done a certain way, it result in this sexual empowerment, but that is not why they engage in it, right? So let's see. One of it is the ultimate loss of control and power, right? If you're thinking of it in the power play angle, it is forced, it is losing control of your body, and it is involves the act of sex. So, if you're sexualizing loss of control, that could be one of the ultimate forms, right, of losing control and power. So also anxiety and fear surrounding rape, like the thought of rape, can be linked to arousal. So like always separating actual rape from the fantasy of it. So the thought of rape can be terrifying. I'm sure, like, we've thought of what it might be like, what this experience will be if you didn't have this control and this violent thing happened to you. And so there's inherently associated fear with rape, and anything that causes fear has a huge potential for being linked to arousal. And this is something I've mentioned several times in my live stream before, but arousal response and fear response is quite similar. So when you get into that fight or flight response from fear, your heart rate goes up, you're getting sweaty palms and that type of sensations. Maybe you can't talk perfectly, you're stuttering. These type of fear response, if you think about it, is exactly the same as arousal response. So your body doesn't quite know the difference when you're being afraid or you're being aroused. Your mind might know, but it's quite similar, your physical responses. So things that cause deep fear can cause a huge arousal. So for some people. So that could be a reason. Social stigma. So we talked earlier about taboo being something easily crossing over to arousal. And rape is very taboo, right? For good reasons. But so other kind of association with rape and taboo is, like, for many women, it's being your body being violated and therefore being quote unquote used goods. You weren't able to protect your virginity, whatever. All of this kind of conditioned, socialized relationship with our bodies, and that being taken away is, like, hugely taboo associated with that. And so, like, using quote unquote or your value as a woman. And so there's a lot of anxiety associated with rape and what happens after, what happens, like what happens to you and your identity. And, I think similar to like a lot of men might have, let's say, small penis humiliation kinks, right? So that's when you grow up being told that, by society, that bigger is better. You have to, the woman will be disappointed if you don't, if you're not big enough, and you're always kind of constantly having this nagging anxiety that maybe you're not enough. And even if you intellectually understand this, like, yeah, my dick is fine. But maybe there is like a little fear somewhere in the back of your mind that when you drop your pants, they're going to be disappointed. So similarly, I think a lot of people go through this fear and anxiety of like, what would happen, my life will be like if this happened to me. And being able to engage in that fear and like really engage, confront that fear and anxiety in a safe environment can be quite a cathartic release for a lot of people. So in a place where your partner says, it created a safe space, you might be really like be able to confront this monster that's usually just kind of invisible. It's out in society. You can't really confront it, and you get to lose and be vulnerable and succumb to this fear and come out on the other side, and you're not damaged goods. You are a whole person. You didn't lose your value. And so you get to kind of go through this cathartic processing of it. So there's that. Another thing can be is like for not having to, before I go there, I want to also talk about also men having these fantasies, because a lot of men do have these fantasies, have rape fantasies as well. And that could come from kind of the social stigma of like, a lot of people still think men can't be raped. It's like, people will laugh at you if you say that you were raped by a woman. And why is that? It's like, it's supposed to be emasculating, right? That you're supposed to be physically stronger and you're supposed to be able to defend yourself, and you couldn't, and the humiliation of that. And so there's a lot of socialized guilt and fear and anxiety as a man that you might have picked up along the course of your lifetime, that could be, that how emasculating it is to be the one who's the loser, and the one that was overpowered, things like this. So that could be a bit like built-in, work itself into your sexual desires. So for it can also be about not having to claim responsibility over the desire of sex. So for a lot of people, especially women, where we grow up, and especially certain culture more than not, than others, that women are not supposed to want sex, to ask for sex, to desire sex and sexual pleasures. And so what do you do when you have those desires, but you're feel too guilty or shameful, shamed due to social conditioning to be able to ask for it? Then a safe way to engage in that is that somebody takes it from you, right? You didn't have to ask for it. They just took it from you, you know. So that it might be kind of this mental gymnastics in a way to get around this subconscious blockage you might have of not having to ask for it. And it was, but still you are able to engage in this sexual act. For instance, you know, Japan is a culture probably compared to, let's say, America, where this pressure is even more, that women are not supposed to be vocal about wanting sex and wanting sexual pleasure, and it's not seen as a positive thing. And so you can see, like in Japanese porn, instead of like Western porn, where you hear women say, yes, 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 please, yes, more. In Japanese porn, you hear, no, 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 please, no, please don't. While even in vanilla porn. And a lot of Western viewers can find it disturbing to watch Japanese porn, because it's even in vanilla porn, it's there's a woman saying no all the time, and that's again kind of this like workaround of being able to enjoy, like engage in sex, and be turned on and be in your mind it feels okay because you're not the one who's asking for it, right? It's being forced upon you. Yes, very interesting. Another thing, desirability. Like this is not obviously like when like people say like blame the victim, saying that they were wearing too revealing clothing, they were asking for it, things like that. You know, they were being too sexy, and the perpetrator couldn't help themselves. You know, that kind of victim blaming obviously is not the reason or legitimate argument for anything, but that scenario is that fictitious scenario is still in people's minds, right? So you might have this fictitious kind of idea of somebody being so attracted to you and so overwhelmed by your sex, like your beauty or physical beauty, that they couldn't help themselves, and they were, you know, they had to take it from you. You know, so that might be a arousing scenario. Again, it's not what's happening in real rape, but it's something that is a fantasy kind of scenario that you might find very arousing. So there's that. Let's see. Yeah. But, you know, so I'm going to end with the part about how to, you know, how to engage with this consensual non-consent situation, right? Talk about it not in the moment. You don't want to whip out a rape fantasy in the moment while you're playing already. Things are happening that can be traumatic to both sides. Both both the sub and the dom, right? So it's something you want to talk about it outside of it, while having a romantic dinner. Bring it up, like, I'm having this little fantasy, what do you think? And then ask about, oh, what does that involve? Like, what specific scenarios about it turn you on? And with something like this that could go wrong, you can use tools like safe words, in case you misjudge or miss signals from your sub that they really don't want it to continue. They can use a pre-agreed upon word to make it end. But yeah, it's like, for me, whenever I'm engaging in something that is very sensitive or easily have a potential to be traumatizing if it went wrong, I go by the sub's past experiences. So they might, I will ask them, oh, what specifically happened in the fantasy? You've played with another partner before. What happened, And so, some people perhaps might have rape fantasies that's all verbal. So it's like a verbal role play while you're having a more milder physical sexual activity. And if they actually felt you physically pushing them around or pinning them down or strangling them or something like that, they might freak out, or that might be too much. Some people might want that physical sensation. So those are things that you want to kind of investigate beforehand. And I also wanted to talk about how this is a two-way street. Rape fantasies can be as traumatic to the dom as to the sub if it's not fleshed out carefully. Of course, being kind of like this rape fantasy, like the role play of rape being thrusted upon you on the victim side of things, you can easily understand how that could be traumatic if it happened, that act of physical violence. But being being on the perpetrator side, the active side of it, can be as equally traumatic as well. So, we don't want, some people, a lot of us, we might feel really, some doms might be really into playing the dominant one and the powerful one, as long as you see the enjoyment in your sub, that it's something that you see that the sub is enjoying. And as soon as they are really mimicking like very realistic fear and terror in their eyes, it might be traumatic, that you don't want to see yourself as this monster. It's traumatic to see a human in distress. So you really want to make sure that your dom is also comfortable engaging in this too. I very often see kind of subs saying like, oh, why can't you just be more aggressive with me and more, take control of me? Like, why can't you just do that for me? I'm really into it, I'm telling you. But yes, it can be very, triggering for people to do it if they're not really into doing it, So it's something that takes both parts in the communication, to what extent that both parties are comfortable with. And yeah, so that's where I'm going to end this. It was a long one because there were some really juicy questions. And I hope to see you guys next month. Thank you. Bye-bye.